This is the state of play for Elite Dangerous Odyssey in August of 2021. Basically, in this video I take a look at the game and see how it's progressed from its rather poor start and whether or not it's actually made any improvements. So, right up front, before we go into the video in too much depth, I want to get a few points out of the way. Firstly, I don't want to tread over old ground. I think by now most of you know my opinions on Odyssey, so I really don't need to reiterate those. It's just not really serving any purpose at this point. Secondly, it seems not everyone is aware of the situation with Odyssey. I've seen quite a few comments on my past video with people actually wondering what's all the fuss about, what is the situation. They've basically been playing Odyssey for weeks now without any problems at all. So in case you do need to catch up, and I'm not going to go over old ground myself, there are some links in the video description below where you can kind of catch up with the situation as things stand and how they've been over the past few months. So with that out of the way, what type of things am I going to look at? Well, I want to break it down into a number of sections. Firstly, we'll look at the game itself. Secondly, Frontier, what's going on with them. And thirdly, what has the reaction from the community been? So let's jump right in, starting with Update 6, which released last week. Now, Update 6 was pretty extensive. There's a whole load of patch notes there. You can find them linked in the video description. But I'm not going to go over the entire patch notes simply because they are a bit long, and really I only want to focus on the issues that have been affecting the majority of people. So those are performance issues as well as the Planetary Tech, and of course bugs as well. So, performance issues. Update 6 added in a nice thing that should improve performance for quite a lot of people, an additional option, that is AMD FSR. This essentially then gives players the option to render the game at a lower resolution and upscale it. All in all, this should give some pretty significant performance increases and is very similar to Nvidia's DLSS technology. So, how does this work? Well, when you jump into the graphics options in Elite Dangerous, you will have the option there to enable AMD FSR. By default, I noticed it was on performance, which is the lowest setting. This means that the game will be rendering at 50% the scale of the screen resolution. So if you want to run at 4K, for example, the game will render at 1080p and then upscale to 4K. I soon changed this to quality and then ultra quality. Each of these have a different render scale, so quality renders at 67% of the screen resolution. This means that the input resolution would be 1440p and the output would be 4K, or equally you could render at 720p and the output resolution would be at 1080p. Ultra quality is at 77%, so obviously the quality here is going to be a bit better, so 1662p rendering out to 4K. All in all, it works pretty well. It does definitely give you some pretty good performance increases. However, the resolution drop is definitely very noticeable. Now, whilst AMD FSR definitely brings some performance improvements to Elite Dangerous Odyssey, it definitely doesn't fix the underlying issue, and this is the overall poor performance. Personally, I'd expect far higher frame rates than what you see here on my setup, which is an RTX 3080 with an AMD Ryzen 7 5800X. And ultimately, with this type of setup, I wasn't really happy to use a render scale, much preferring to go with a quality setting instead, so I disabled AMD FSR, returning to the default rendering. Ultimately, both with AMD FSR and without, the frame rates varied wildly even in the same areas, and you can see some pretty significant frame rate drops at 28 frames per second and even at 19 frames per second in some occasions. But to be perfectly fair, there was some significant performance increases when using AMD FSR, so if you do have trouble there and you can put up with the quality reduction in terms of the image, then definitely enable that and choose it, because it will gain you quite a significant amount of frame rates. Now, before we move on to planetary improvements, I just briefly want to touch on the lighting here. I think it's widely known that space was far too dark in the past. It didn't really matter if you was that near a sun. Once you got a few thousand light seconds away from it, everything went just stupidly dark. As I've mentioned, I'm fully aware that some people quite like this. After all, they do feel the space should be dark, but Frontier have admitted this is broken, that it was unintended, and it seems they've gone quite a way to actually fix this now. Right here you can see space looks quite a bit better, at least this distance from the star. The only downside I can see so far is that inside the cockpits it seems a little bit oversaturated or a little bit illuminated too much. But outside the cockpit in space, it looks pretty good now. Although in some areas, such as the backdrop there, it does look a little bit too soft. That's against the galactic disk. Moving on to Planetary Tech, you can see right here, this lovely carbon atmosphere looks very nice indeed. We've got a beautiful atmospheric effect here, changing to a deep, beautiful orangey red as we get down towards the planetary surface. More importantly, you can see that the planetary surface itself has some nice variation here and has definitely benefited from whatever changes Frontier have made. And you can see that these quality improvements do hold up as we get closer down towards the planet and ultimately land down here. Now what this means overall for all the planets, are we back to the big old canyons of the days of yore? Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't actually know. After all, there's far too many planets out there to go and actually check. I do know though that planets have been improved. There are some deeper canyons here, shall we say, but I think we're not going to go back to what we had Horizons days just yet, or maybe not at all. At any rate, definitely some improvements here, but both in terms of the performance as well as the planetary tech, I do think there's a long way to go yet, so a lot more work needs to be done to bring these to where they should be and where they need to be. Overall though, a step in the right direction for sure. Moving on to communications, this has definitely taken a step up over the past few months. Take a look at the official forums, you'll see that the community team are pretty much there, very active every single day, weekends aside, which I guess is completely understandable. But yes, definitely a big improvement there and a much better presence. So what about the reaction and feelings from the community themselves? Well, this one is much harder to judge. After all, there's no way to quantify the feelings of literally thousands and thousands of different people. And I certainly couldn't speak on behalf of all these people and would never claim to. That said, there are some different statistics that we can look at. One of these, of course, is the fabled Steam charts. And I know not everyone's a fan of these, but they 100% do give a trend of the number of players actively playing. And we can see here that the numbers of players are dropping very rapidly, and they continue to drop all throughout July, making July one of the lowest played months in terms of peak users for a very long time actually. Now we could argue that this is comparable to Julys from previous years, last year notwithstanding, because most people were trapped at home. But yeah, it's not too bad for a July in summer months. A lot of people outside doing other activities, so player numbers tend to drop, and this is comparative to 2019 and all the years before that. But that said, do keep in mind that this is just mere weeks after the release of the biggest expansion of Elite Dangerous ever released, Odyssey. So personally, I do think the numbers here should be far higher. Some people will argue that it's quite natural for player numbers to drop after the release of a new game, and most games do that. However, that tends to be true for single-player titles and titles with big campaigns. It's not necessarily true of games that are live services. MMOs, after all, tend to have a big uptick when new expansions are released, and they then retain a significant amount of those players. Odyssey, unfortunately, hasn't done that. In terms of other statistics, being a YouTuber, I do have access to a whole bunch of different information here, basically giving me some information and insight onto the interest in Elite Dangerous. And Elite Dangerous interest is definitely way down. Last week I released a video on development update number 2. Typically a video like this showing off new content, or talking about new content rather, such as the improved planets, would receive maybe 60 to 70,000 views, maybe quite a bit more. We can see here that this one is hovering around about the 35,000 mark at the moment, so I could reasonably say that the interest has reduced in terms of Elite Dangerous videos by about 50%, so we'll have to see how this video actually performs. Now don't get me wrong here, I'm not concerned or worried about the impact of this on my YouTube channel. Views overall on my channel are doing very well, so this really isn't a problem for me, but it does give me concern about the overall health of Elite Dangerous as a whole. Basically, I think it's just another indicator that interest in Elite as a whole is very much down at the moment. Player sentiment is also another thing that's very hard to judge. It's not easily quantifiable. I can only go by what I see on my YouTube comments and on the forums. YouTube comments especially are something I pay attention to, and well, just go and have a look below this video. Let me know what you think. Are people happy or are people unhappy? Also, why not let me know your thoughts on how you feel about the state of Elite Dangerous at the moment? Is it heading in the right direction, or as some people are saying, is it too little or too late? And actually, that seems a pretty good subject for an opinion poll on my YouTube channel, so I will go and put one of those up right now and also link that in the video description. If you're so inclined, go and vote. In terms of information from the developers themselves, this has also seen some improvement. We saw that with developer update number 2, which was released recently. Now this covered the patch update number 6, which we just talked about. It also covered a bit of the future content of the game, and if you want more details on that, do check out the link which is appearing on the screen right now. That will give you a bit of information what all that development update was actually about. So yeah, it went into some detail about the future of the game, and it did go into some tech details as well. So a big step up from development update number 1. Still, I think there's room for some more improvement. Personally speaking, I'd like to see some more technically orientated details from the developers, perhaps deep diving into some of the aspects of the game, why some things are working, why some things are not, and what the plans overall are for certain aspects of the game. So yeah, room for improvement still there, but definitely quite a step up. So there we are. I think that kind of leaves us in a twofold position. Firstly, the people who are unhappy with Odyssey as a game. Unfortunately, I suspect that no amount of performance fixing, no amount of bug fixing is going to change people's opinions if they feel that Odyssey was the wrong direction to take Elite Dangerous in. And I'd imagine for the type of people who feel that way, that no amount of bug fixing, no amount of performance increases are going to change their opinion on Odyssey, unfortunately. I think you know the camp I'm in on that. But for those of people who actually do enjoy Odyssey, that think it is the right direction and the right type of edition, then these improvements are definitely taking the game in the right direction. So I think overall, eventually, Elite Dangerous will get there for you. It's just perhaps a bit unfortunate that it seems Odyssey overall has somewhat split the player base. I'll be back very soon with some more videos on Elite Dangerous. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.